What is going on, everybody? It is Tuesday morning, and I know this is a bit of a weird time, but we're doing a thing because we're doing some traveling this afternoon, and so I figured I would get this one in before we left. We are doing our normal Just Gonna Say It podcast live every Tuesday, and we're going to upload this then to, all of the podcast platforms, etc. So it's kind of a new thing we're doing. That's why I actually moved to a nice microphone. And so pretty cool. So we're going to talk today about pickup stuff. I got a few things that I want to mention before we get going. I hope everybody is having a good Tuesday this morning. Like I said, I'm on my way to Texas Toast Guitars in Denver, Colorado to do another pickup winding workshop. So we've actually shipped a pickup winder out there. I'm actually going to bring a pickup winder with me. I've got 3 of these things now. And I've got basically duplicates of most of the stuff that we have. Most of the stuff that we have here in the shop. And so we're bringing that out there. And I think we have 6 or 7 people that we're going to teach to make pickups this week. We're going to do it tomorrow in Denver. So I'm really excited about it. These live things that we do on Tuesday at 4 p.m., I'm going to be on the plane at that time. Excuse the sparkly water open in your ear. But anyway, so we're going to get this in before we go because these are fun to do. And I have some really cool things to tell you about. And I have some really cool things to talk about today on the Just Gonna Say It live podcast. So a couple of things I want to mention. One is, you guys know that I am friends with the dudes over there at Runway Audio. They make like the best guitar cables in the business. Lowest capacitance per foot, really nice Tech Flex outer coating, not so stiff that it won't coil up nice, and also not so stiff that it won't lay on the floor properly, but still you can run it over with an amp cabinet or something, like an amp case, and you won't wreck your cable. These are really, really good. Anyway, you can go to the link in the description below, or you can just go to their website and use code Dylan Talks Tone and get 10% off. They're not sponsoring this video, but I wanted to mention it because there's also a link in the description below. They invited us to be part of a contest. I'm not doing this contest. Runway Audio is doing it, and we're doing it in conjunction with the group that owns D'Angelico. So Pigtronics, Supro, I think Temple Audio, pedal boards. They're not owned by them, but they're in the contest. And I think 3 winners are going to get parts of this really cool rig. An amp, a set of pickups, a guitar, really cool stuff. So there's a link to it in the description. I think it goes for like 2 weeks. You can enter. There's a couple of different ways you can like multiply entries and that kind of stuff. Super cool. So go and check that out. And yeah, pretty cool deal. So I just want to mention Runway Audio again. We were in Nashville last week, and I got to meet with those guys, and it was really super cool. Austin's a good dude, and yeah, really cool thing. And then the other thing I want to mention, again, this is not sponsored, but they did send me some stuff. And there's some big news that Stringjoy. So Stringjoy is probably one of my favorite string companies. They make really, really good stuff. I don't think have ever seen this color of box from Stringjoy, and we'll get to why in a minute. But they are available at Sweetwater now, which they never were before. You had to order them direct and from a couple of dealers around the country, but now you can get them at Sweetwater. There's a link to them in the description below as well. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we're going to do some string shootout stuff, like some, I don't know, some comparisons and whatever. And if you follow this channel for any amount of time and this podcast for any amount of time, you will know that I do not like coated strings. I'm not a fan, acoustic or electric. About 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, Stringjoy came out with the Foxwood coated strings for acoustic guitars. I love them. I am not a fan of Elixir strings. Elixir is they're not a string company. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but Elixir is owned by Gore, WL Gore. Gore-Tex, you know, the people that make your clothes waterproof. They buy the strings from another string manufacturer and they put the coating on them and then they sell them as elixirs. So they're not a string company. They just are a coating company. And I'm not a fan of those strings. I've never been a fan of them. String Joy is made in Nashville, Tennessee, and these are really good. The really cool part about them is this is the electric set. I don't even think these are actually out yet. I think these are kind of on a pre-order or limited run basis, but they sent me a set of these. What I'm going to try to do is put these on a guitar before I leave today and play it a little bit and then let them sit all week. Give these things some time and see how they feel and sound. I haven't even pulled them out of the package yet. I plan to do that on camera because I want to get a good impression of how they sound or how they feel, because I don't like the way elixirs feel. So we'll have to get back with you on this, but this is pretty stinking cool. So anyway, those are a couple of things that I wanted to mention today before we get going. It's not really ads, but it's also not really sponsored, but it's also stuff that I think is cool and I wanted to share with you. So we're going to do that. That cable does look solid. I wonder whether they make a noticeable difference in sound. They make a huge difference in sound. So we're going to do another video on cables pretty soon. It's something I'm working on. Also, I'm doing this by myself. This is not like the normal Thursday thing. So put a bunch of question marks if you have a real question that you want to ask, or not even a real question, just whatever, if you want me to notice it. Also, super chats help because they're a different color, so they see them as well. And so we'll try to get into this. The discussion that I want to have today, we'll talk about cables in a second. I'll get to that. The discussion that I have today is surrounding copying stuff because it came up a lot in the last week, since we talked last week about the warm audio copies of the Klon and the Zen Drive. And so a bunch of people in the comment, not a bunch, but a very spirited conversation started from, and I appreciate it a lot. A very spirited conversation started from that, saying, well, don't you just copy pickups? Isn't that the same? Yes and no. So we'll dive into that because there's some nuance here that I don't think you can get in a YouTube comment that I thought it would be interesting to talk about and get your thoughts on as well. Before we go, let's talk about excuse me. Let's talk about these cables though. So when you put two wires next to each other, any two wires, doesn't matter. But when you put lots of wires together, it multiplies. Capacitive loss happens. The easiest way to say it is basically, off-gassing is the wrong word, but if you can imagine that when you smell a piece of leather or you smell a piece of hot plastic and the chemicals coming out of it, imagine that being, it's a stupid way to illustrate this, but I'm trying to make it visually, or, you can sense it. Basically, signal is doing that out of an electric wire. It's kind of like losing some a little bit. I call it kind of like off-gassing, more or less. And it's when you have a bunch of wires together, they do that to each other. And so signal gets lost, especially over a longer run. It's measured in capacitance. So in a cable, it's measured in picofarads per foot. And so a cheap cable, your normal, Monster, those aren't even cheap, but your normal Monster cables, your normal, even good cables, like a quote unquote good cable, like a Mogami 2319, is like 30 to 40 picofarads per foot of capacitance. The higher the number, the worse it is. These are 20. So if you take a cheap cable and put it next to this cable, if you have good pickups and a good signal chain the rest of the way, you will notice a major difference in your sound. And the reason why it's important is because people don't put the guitar cable with the guitar. So we've talked about this before, how a guitar is it's a passive circuit. We're not talking about an active guitar like EMGs or Fluences or something. We're talking about a regular old-fashioned guitar. It's a passive instrument, which means that everything you add to it takes away from the original intended signal, including the cable. Your guitar circuit stops at the first amplifier that cable hits. So if you have a 20-foot cable, that cable's part of your guitar. That cable is not part of the amp until it gets to the amp, and it affects what your guitar can do, and takes away from that the longer the cable is and the worse the cable is. When it gets to the first preamp, a buffer in your tuner, a boost pedal that's always on, or your amplifier itself, then it's way less effect because the signal's getting boosted back up and there's all kinds of other things happening signal-wise. But you really need to, if you're really going to be cool about this, think about the cable as part of your guitar, not as part of your pedal board or your amp. At least the first cable. Once it gets to an amp of any kind, boost, buffer, whatever, then that's a whole nother conversation. But it's stealing from your guitar until then. And so a good cable does make a difference. Now, if you have terrible pickups and it's super muddy and etc., then it doesn't, you may not hear a difference. But if you have good pickups and you have, a fairly well sorted out guitar, you can really hear it. It's, I liken it to if you had a blanket over your amp and you pulled the blanket off. Now the sound will come through a blanket, but there's just a thing, like a clarity and a dimension that it has that it does not have when you have, saran wrap around your amp or a big blanket over your amp. It's just that much excuse me, it's that much clearer, because the first thing to go is going to be that clarity on top. It's going to be that kind of dynamic on top when you have a bad cable. So that's just to dive into that a little bit. All right. Does a wireless system suffer similar loss as a cable? That's a good question. So wireless systems, the simple answer is yes, because they're actually converting the signal to a radio wave and then converting it back. And so anytime you convert one signal to a different type of signal, there is inherently some loss that happens. Getting used to having a proper microphone in front of me. Instead, I used to use a shotgun on top of the camera. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So the thing is, though, is that you can engineer around it within. I think a lot of wireless companies, that's the whole idea of a good one versus not a good one, is them engineering around that problem so that it's less of an effect that's heard. So if you buy the Amazon one for $20 versus a really expensive Shure one or Line 6 or something like that, Sennheiser, that kind of stuff, then it makes much more sense. So, cool. Very cool. Okay, so let's talk about pickup copying stuff, shall we? So, one of the allegations, or I don't know what you want to call it, but anyway, a couple people in the comments were pretty passionate about the fact they're like, well, you're like the pot calling the kettle black, saying that a pickup pedal company is just stealing or copying from another pedal company. There's a couple of let's talk about the pedal thing first. There's a couple of interesting things that came up in the comments that I kind of didn't think of, and I wanted to bring them up to make sure that we were being fair to everybody. Since those pedals are not in production anymore, and part of maintaining trademarks is something being in production and maintaining and defending that trademark, it is possible that there could be some gray area with copying something that is no longer in production. That's an interesting one, especially if a large amount of time has passed and legally the person who owns that trademark, or even if they've ever actually trademarked. I don't know if the Klon Centaur little logo and that design of that box or the Zen Drive box had ever been trademarked. I don't know that to be true. I don't know. It's probably something that could be looked up. I never looked it up because I personally don't want to waste the mental energy on it because it doesn't matter to me. But I really think that that could play into it. So if a long enough time went by where those things kind of fell out of being maintained by the original maker, or they were never trademarked, then it's probably kind of a free. Is it kind of icky? Yeah, I wouldn't do it, but it's probably fine. It might be fine. It might be totally legal. It might be, they might have looked at this already and said it's totally fine to copy it. Electrical circuits, unless they are patented for some material difference, a lot of times it's really hard to protect them. So it's possible that those pedals being copied are fine. There may be nothing wrong with it. Now, would I do it? Does it feel weird to me? Yes, it does feel weird to me, and I wouldn't do it. I would feel like I am stealing from someone else. So this brings me on to the questions that people asked of me. Isn't that the same as making a pickup? Because isn't your stuff the same exact thing as somebody else's? So let's talk about the nuance of that. It's very interesting. What are the design elements? Okay, let's back up. One of the things that people said was, well, when you put a Strat pickup in a guitar, it looks exactly like a Strat pickup. So that pedal looks exactly like that pedal. Okay, you're right. Absolutely 100%. And I get your point. However, the difference being, I am making a replacement part. I'm not making a new product and saying it's a new product. I am making, in fact, I think it says on my website, quality replacement parts. We are making replacement parts. So I would say this: when you go and buy a spark plug or an air filter or a fuel pump or a water pump, okay, let's take a water pump. If you buy a OEM water pump or you go to AutoZone and you buy a knockoff water pump that's made in China, because we know they are, and the factory water pump is $120, and the AutoZone knockoff water pump is like $58. Okay, I'm probably talking in 1980s money here, but you know what I'm saying. Nobody thinks twice about that because they're making a replacement part. They're not stealing technology. Now, sometimes there are patented intellectual property stuff involved in that where no replacement part by a third-party manufacturer is available. So then you have to go and buy an OEM part for replacement. An example of this could be in guitar land, there are some circuits where that is possible. There are also some pickup designs where this is possible. But when you're making a replacement part, you're making a replacement part. It fits in the hole. If I were to make a pickup that didn't fit in the hole of your guitar and look like a Strat pickup, you wouldn't buy it because you're like, well, then I would have to cut my guitar to fit your product in there. I'd have to get a new pick guard, or I'd have to buy a whole new pick guard as a set, or I'd have to have a swimming pool route only. Like a replacement part is a replacement part to fit in the place where something else already fit. So let's dive into that a little bit further. Within that, is it really a copy? Let's go back to the water pump example. I used to have a BMW with the S52 engine, the normal straight six, like the 3-liter straight six. Those water pumps from the factory had plastic impellers, and at like 80,000 miles, they would all blow up, and you would overheat your BMW and probably crack your radiator, because that was a thing that they did too. And then you would have to buy a new water pump and a new radiator. The aftermarket ones were improved because I think they had a brass impeller and they had some other design changes inside. On the outside, they looked exactly the same. They bolted in, they looked exactly the same from the outside. They had to, so that they would fit in the spot. But there were design changes inside to make sure that those problems from before didn't happen again. The plastic tanks on the radiator, the reinforcements on them were different so that the radiator tanks didn't crack. Were some improvements made in the materials so that they didn't crack over, because what would happen is as they get older, they would get brittle, and so they would start to break. Anybody who's had a, E39, E36, E53, any of those BMWs from the early 2000s or late 90s remembers this. So there were material improvements made, even though they could not patent these things because they were not different enough or exclusive enough to patent. They were not patented things that they were copying, but they were making little improvements to make sure that even though they fit in the same spot and looked exactly the same, that they would be material improvements. That's exactly what we do with pickups. Same exact thing. So when you look at, I don't know. Here, hang on. Let me grab one. I know that this is also a podcast, so we won't get too off in the weeds here, but when you look at the original Gibson P90, for example, we use a different steel in our screws. We use a different base plate material. We use different wire material. We use different magnets. They're all Nico 5 bar magnets, but we don't get them from the same place. These are materially different. They look the same so that they fit in the same hole, but they are not the same. Same thing with strap pickups. The bobbins that we use, here's the bottom of a bobbin. These are similar to how, there we go. I'm showing the camera. These are similar to how the bottom bobbins were made in the 60s, but they are no longer made this way. They're not made this way at all. Most of the time are plastic. So materials, design, wind count, magnets, all those things are principally different. And what's interesting too is there are some published numbers for a couple of pickups. So you take, but there are also a lot of presumptions and assumptions made about pickups. When you go, I think I've said this many times on this channel, that there are over 3,000 different Fender iterations of pickups, because they actually change the pickup a little bit every time they come out with a new model. So they'll say, this is the Ultra 2, this is the whatever. Those pickups, those noiseless pickups in those guitars are different from the noiseless pickups 3 years ago. They change them a little bit every time. I was told this by a person who buys parts for Fender. And they have a big binder with all of the, or database, however they keep it these days, of all of that stuff. So when you say, are we copying something? No, because we don't know what we're copying. It's actually pretty unrealistic to take and I've never done this. I've tried, but you can't really take a Fender pickup from the 60s and unwind it and count all the winds. You'll never actually accurately do that. I'm sure somebody could, but that is a terrible way to spend your time. So, for example, there is a guitar company who I make pickups for right now, who gave me a set of like Abigail Ibarra 60s pickups. I couldn't unwind them to copy them. All I could do was take the materials that I have available to me now in 2022. Well, I did this a year ago, but at the time, even though they were not the same materials that Abigail Ibarra used whenever she made those pickups, and make something that sounded the same, but we got to it a completely different way. The wine count was different, the magnets were different, the wire was different, everything was different. Did they sound the same? According to the folks that we made these pickups for, yes. Were they the same? No, not at all. They performed similarly, but they were not the same in materials or design. However, by appearance from the outside, they still stuck in the same hole because you don't want to cut up a guitar and not have it fit. You know what I mean? It's an interesting conversation to have, and there's a lot of kind of nuance to it. And so I don't want to discount what anybody says, or you know what I mean? Like be like, well, that's not true, because probably all the things are true. Everybody in those comments all said things that were true and made sense to them, knowing what they knew about the business and knowing what they knew about how guitars work. So I don't want to discount what anybody says, but add to that conversation so you kind of get a wider understanding of how all this stuff works. Now, if I got a hold of somebody's notebook, like I have a notebook up there with all my designs in it, if I got a hold of somebody's notebook and copied everything out of it, that would be sketchy, which I would never do. Everything that we've done here is designs of our own. You know, I've never actually copied a pickup. So, down to the material and stuff. That's why when we, on our website, our slogan on Dylan Talks Tone is the new vintage, because I purposely do not use vintage correct parts. I 100% know and believe that we can get to the tone. I know it. It's not a belief. We've done it for years. We can get to those vintage tones without using the same materials, without using unobtainium stuff. That's why our pickups are average boutique prices. They're not, there's some brands out there. I almost said a brand. I don't want to. There's some brands out there that charge ungodly amounts of money for pickups because they say they use new old stock garbage and stuff from the 60s and 70s. That's fine. They can do that. And if you're really into that, that's really cool, because it is cool. But I don't believe it's necessary. I think we can be at a more attainable price with more attainable products, handmade in the USA and all the things you want, but without the it's new old stock wire from the 60s, which I don't even want to use because it's not even as good. But people have it around their heads that they need it. You know what I mean? So our whole philosophy about how we make pickups is totally different than a lot of the people that are trying to replicate vintage stuff, if that makes sense. So yeah, let's see if we can get in here really quick and see. It's possible to trademark a color. Absolutely. So DiMarzio's cream bobbins, that is a trademarked color for that. UPS brown, somebody mentioned. FedEx purple. Home Depot orange. Home Depot orange is also another one. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a thing. Where did I get my cap? Oh, I got it at the Gibson Garage in Nashville, Tennessee when I was there last week. I got a hat and a couple of shirts. I got Leslie a Slash, because he's a huge Slash fan. I got Leslie a Gibson Slash shirt. And I got me a t-shirt, and I think I wore it in a video this week, and I got a hat. Because Gibson fanboy, so people can get in the comments and like say I'm a fanboy or whatever. I think it's really funny that people I think it's really funny that people give me a hard time about being a fanboy of various stuff. One of the comments, usually we bring up, I guess now would be a good time. Usually we bring up some questions or comments that came out of YouTube over the last week, and I found this one to be interesting. Um, let's see. Hi, Dylan. Thank you for the video. Um, I never heard an explanation as to why exactly you eventually quit using a Kemper, praised a tube amp lately, and now are using a non-tube amp. And people were what was the Kemper missing? And people kept asking me, like, I thought you were a non-tube guy, and then I got a tube amp, and then now you have a modeler again, because I got the Princeton Tone Master thing is awesome. Here's the reason. I'm just gonna drop this bomb on you. I don't know if you've thought about this, but you can like more than one thing at the same time. Like, you can like tube amps and see their value, and you can also like digital stuff and see its value. And not, and I, people are going to accuse me of sounding condescending with that, but good grief, I'm tired of hearing about it. You can like more than one thing at once. You don't have to be in this camp or this camp. It's like Fender or Gibson, PRS or nobody, whatever you want to say. I like, and I think I get accused a lot of times of being critical of certain stuff. I like almost everything. I like way more things than I don't like. And we're going to do what we can on this channel to make sure that people know that from now on. I was thinking about that the other day, that I need to work harder at that. I listened to Bob Keeley on the Tone Mob podcast, and he was really inspiring to me about how positive he was about a lot of things, even when it was tough to be positive about a lot of things. And what's funny is, when I'm not on this channel, I am like that. I don't let anything get me down usually. But what gets me down is guitar players hating on other guitar players' stuff or on each other. That really gets me down. It's like a thing that gets me down. And what happens is, this entire channel lends itself to that. So we're trying to get away from that. I really love almost everything. There's a couple of there's and I wouldn't discourage anybody from getting anything. I think one of the things that people get wrong is there is no bad gear usually. 99% of everything that's made, except for some knockoff stuff like you can find on Amazon. Like, sometimes there's a tuner that's terrible, or some wireless things are kind of terrible, or whatever. Like, some of that stuff that's $10 on Amazon can be kind of sucky. You know what I mean? But in the real, we'll call it the real gear world, anything you can buy at Sweetwater, anything that you can buy at Guitar Center, anything, 99% of the time, all that stuff is good for the person that it's intended for. And I think where people fall into the trap of is Tone Masters suck because it doesn't have a headphone jack, or Tone Masters suck because it doesn't sound exactly like a 65 whatever, or Tone Masters suck because it doesn't have an effects loop. I don't need an effects loop. I don't care how it compares to a 1965 whatever, because it sounds good in its own right. It's freaking fantastic. And I figured out a way around the headphone jack, which I think is stupid. It should have a headphone jack. I'm like, I understand who this is for. Getting back to the Kemper thing, I loved my Kemper. I had it for 2 years. I had 3 of them, actually. I had the toaster first, powered toaster with an external cab, and I gigged that thing, and I loved it. And then when my band broke up, we stopped gigging as much, and I started just doing like acoustic stuff. So I got a stage that lived on my desk in my old house, and in the motorhome we had a stage. I loved that thing. I loved it. The reason I got rid of it, there's no real reason I got rid of it, except for an opportunity came up to own a McPherson guitar. and I had to sell a bunch of stuff, my most expensive stuff, because a McPherson guitar is not cheap. So I had to sell my most expensive stuff, and the Kemper went, and so did my acoustic guitar that I had at the time. And actually, I got my acoustic guitar back, and I have tossed around many, many times buying a Kemper again. But I think the world has moved on a little bit, and I'm kind of waiting. I want to buy another multi effects modeler, because I think they're useful to have around for the channel. But I'm kind of waiting for things to sort of level out to see who's coming up with the next cool thing. I think Kemper at this point might be a little bit old news. I don't know that to be true. There's no knock on it. It's a fantastic piece of equipment. I just want to see what else is out there before I drop $1,800 on something. You know what I mean? And in the meantime, what has become important to me now has changed. My needs have changed. And I think that's another thing that people don't think about. Guitar players we are organisms. We are people, and our needs change. My needs have changed. I don't need a Kemper. What I really want is a good sound that I can use for reference for making pickups, i.e. the Fender Princeton, because that's my favorite amp. And I want something that's easy to record these YouTube videos with when I sit down with something, and I sit down with a guitar, flip it on, hit the space bar on the computer, and boom, we have good tone. I want that. The Princeton gives me that, and the St. James gives me that. And actually, this little guy gives me that too. You guys don't even know when I use this in a video, and it sounds fantastic. I've used it in videos and not even told you. For those of you on the listening only side of that, I was showing them my little Positive Grid Spark Mini. I've used that on videos and not even told you, and it sounds fantastic. And I get all kind of compliments on the tone in the video, and nobody even knows. So that's what I'm saying. None of this really matters as long as you find a sound that you like. And there's no bad gear. I think all of this stuff. Now, the Positive Grid Spark Mini is good for certain things, and it's terrible at other things, like being loud. The St. James is great for a lot of stuff, but it's not the perfect amp. The Princeton Tone Master obviously is great at many, many things, but sometimes I need more power. So I have this. Like, there's different reasons for stuff, but not one thing sucks. It's all cool. It's all really good. And I think people lose the fact that you should like all stuff and see how it fits in with your needs. Just because it doesn't fit in with your needs doesn't mean the thing sucks. You know what I mean? So being a little more positive about that, I think, is a thing that I'm personally gonna work on. Let's excuse me. I got a bunch of people here at work right now, huh? I always wondered what the best time for these things was. It's really hard to kind of gauge that. Do you think the circuit board wired Gibson guitars changed the tone of the guitar at all compared to a conventional wired Gibson? No. They are the components on those boards are actually really good. I want to say they're Panasonic capacitors, I think. And I think they're CTS 330 pots. They're good. A lot of people want to downplay them because they're circuit boards, but honestly, they're quieter than regular wires. Like because it's on a shielded board. Like they're really good, actually. There's nothing wrong with them. The only downside to them is modding the guitar. Then you can't play with anything because it's just the little Molex connector. But you can buy the Molex connector on Amazon or from Full Compass or any of those places. I can't remember the name of that Molex connector, but you can buy that and put that on any pickup wires that you want, really, and plug it into your guitar. It'd be fine. Yeah, I think it's totally fine. You have much info on your YouTube channel about your DAF pickups, but could you spotlight your Tele pickups? I'd like to know more. What do you want to know, man? They're in every Tele video that we've ever done. They're in it. We did one like 3 weeks ago because we did the It was when I was in Sevierville, Tennessee. So yeah, it had to be a month ago. We did the um 40th anniversary Telecaster, and we put those pickups in it. And everybody got mad at me because I didn't use the same amp in the video. But those things are amazing. Basically, what I did was I had a friend. Speaking of copying stuff, I had a friend with a 66. Well, I still have the friend. He doesn't have the guitar anymore. Um, he had a 66 Telly, and the bridge pickup was microphonic on it. So he gave it to me for a week or so. This was years ago. Um, and I fixed the guitar for him, and I'm like, I really, really, really like these pickups. They are fantastic. And so that was the first time that I took a Fender pickup from the mid 60s, um, and like measured the specs and tried to figure out, but we used modern material. We used all the materials that we normally use at Dylan Talks Tone, and we got to that sound. They are very mid 60s. The bridge pickup is probably late 50s, early 60s sound. But again, that's so relative. All that stuff is so relative. Basically, the biggest thing you need to know about those pickups, and people find this really odd, but it's the way most Telecaster pickups from the vintage eras are. The neck pickup actually is wound to a higher DC resistance than the bridge pickup. But because the frequency response is different, it doesn't matter and it balances. This is why DC resistance is a stupid measurement for pickups. Because the dimension of the pickup is different, the wire is different, everything is different. You have 43 gauge on the neck and you have 42 on the bridge, so you can't really match this stuff anyways. Alnico 5, they're fantastic. They are the best tele pickups I have ever made, and we have made tons of tele pickups, all different stuff. I have tried all kinds of stuff, and I will tell you, without naming names, because I'm not a name dropper guy, but chances are you've heard those pickups before, because they're in a lot of guitars, and they're in a lot of good guitars. They're in a lot of good guitars. I'm really proud of those. Yeah, and everybody, I've never had anybody send me a set of those back and say I didn't like them, or email me and say I didn't like them. Not once, not one time ever. Watch it happen now. Oh, we got a super chat. Sorry about missing you, dude. I apologize for that. Why doesn't position 2 and 4 on a Strat sound like a humbucker? The only thing I can think of is different magnets and the mag field being spread. Actually, Red Hat Penguin, it's more about how it's wired. So when you have a humbucker, it's 2 single coils wound in series, meaning it's almost like the pickups are wired end to end. So the signal goes into one and then goes into the other and then goes back to the guitar. When you have 2 pickups wound in parallel, they're next to each other, not end to end, in their wiring, not in the physical position, but in their wiring. So it's a parallel versus a series situation. That's why they don't sound like that. If you were to take 2 single coils and put them in parallel, they would sound like a spread apart humbucker. Actually, they would. For example, a 4-position Telecaster where you have a series situation on a Telecaster, it sounds kind of like a big humbucker, but not, because they're spread apart. It sounds more like a conventional humbucker the closer you put them physically together, because of the way the string is, the way the string vibrates. But you still get that same kind of big humbucker effect, as even wider, like, neck and bridge on a Tele, for example. And the same thing would happen on a Strat. I might be able to do that. I might be able to actually simulate that with my PRS Fiore. I think I have a setting where I could actually show that. It doesn't have series though. We might be able to come up with a thing where you could do that. I don't like twisted tellies. I'm not a fan of those at all. Um, so yeah, very cool. Thank you for the super chat, Red Hat. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions in here that we're missing. Ryan Elias. Because Ryan Elias asked why we're up so dang early because he's on the West Coast. Because I got to fly to Colorado in about, well, I got to leave for the airport in about an hour. So that's a thing. Josh Carter brings up a good point. Think about series as them just adding up and parallel as them independently creating sound at the same time. In fact, to take your comment, which is totally makes sense, a step further, when you put them in parallel, it actually halves the power of both of them. So it's like speakers. So let's say you've got two 3.8, like on a PAF, you have something like 3.8 or so it ends up being like 7.8K. So you have 3.8 K pickups, coils to make a 7.8K added together in series humbucker. Well, then when you wire those in parallel, it halves them in half. So you end up with half the output. That's why the notch positions are a little quieter. The only reason they don't sound quieter, and this is another kind of misconception resulting from this whole thing with output of pickups, is the frequency response changes, and so you can hear it more. It's all about it's less about output than it is the frequency response of the pickup. That's why I don't care about those numbers. People always ask me, how many K is it? I don't care. Like, I don't care. I mean, sometimes you kind of have to, but what you're really concerned about is where does the thing sit? So if it's really super mid scooped, it's going to sound a certain way, and it's going to sound quieter, especially if your buddy over here has a really mid peaky, keep hitting the microphone, a real mid peaky pickup. So you're really more concerned about how the thing sounds in the frequency range than you are about the power, because I can take a really low output pickup, and if it's got really good mid range, I'll still be louder than you if you have a 15K humbucker, because you're going to be so flat in the middle that you're going to sound like a bass guitar with no high end and all muddy. And I come in here with my super pokey mid range, even if it's a low output pickup, and imagine you're all flat like this and I'm sticking up in the middle, you're going to hear me more. So, I really like what I always go back to this. John Bollinger said this to me, I don't know, probably almost 10 years ago now, but he's talking about how everything needs to have its own sonic space on the stage and it can't cross over from each other. I'll never forget him talking about that every musician, every person on the stage, including the vocalists, reside in a particular sonic space, and you need to figure out where you fit in so that you are heard. If you're doing the same thing as somebody else, then that's where you start to get lost. So the bass player and the rhythm guitarist really need to work together to make sure that they don't get lost in each other. The rhythm guitar player and the lead guitar player need to make sure that they don't get lost in each other. The lead guitar player needs to make sure that he never, or as desired in the band, never fights with the vocalist, because a guitar actually, especially in single note situations, is in the same range as it's a vocal instrument, like a voice, like a human voice. So you're going to be fighting. That's why ding dong guitar players who think they're awesome and play over vocals all the time are so annoying, because they're trying to establish they're trying to occupy the same space. And so that's why being a tasteful guitar player who doesn't play over the vocals is a better guitar player than somebody who is doing wheedly deedlies over somebody's voice, because that's why it's annoying, because you're going for that same sonic space. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I think in thinking about guitar players too, or keyboard players too, like every instrument, like all of the in horns, if you have horns in your band, then you really got to worry about your guitar tone, because again, it's in the vocal range. So thinking about all that is really, really important. Also, bedroom tone versus live tone is a completely different thing. I EQ my amp way different for a YouTube video where I'm by myself than I do when I'm playing live in a band. That's why when you get on these forums and everybody's like, hey, I got this new pedal, show me your settings, it doesn't matter, because your room might be a different size than mine. Your amp might be set in the corner versus next to the wall. And, if I set my amp in the middle of the room versus next to the wall, I'm going to EQ it different because it's going to bounce off the wall different. And so you have to adjust everything different. And your mid range is going to be all over the place. And your bass frequencies are going to be all over the place. Like, all those things matter. And so playing in this room versus in the living room, I EQ the amp different because the living room's bigger than this room that I'm in. Like, the ceiling is, all that stuff. Everything matters. So that's why nerding out about some of this stuff is pointless if you can just sit there and play with your knobs on your amp. It's kind of an interesting thing. What are the compromises on a minimum winds for any pickup? Ooh, that's a great question. It depends on the wire gauge. So you have less inductance possibility with less winds and bigger wire gauge, but it all interacts with each other because the strength of the magnet, like, there's all kinds of stuff. So the strength of the magnet, the dimensions of the coil, the gauge of the wire, and the amount of wire, all can interact. The thickness of the insulation on the wire, all that stuff interacts to create inductance. So there is no real answer for that. Charlie Christian pickups are really low wind count because they use a big, big wire, but they're so powerful. Like 3.5K with two big magnets on the bottom, like Alnico 5 bars, 38 gauge wire, like really big wire, in a funky coil shape. Charlie Christian is an excellent example because all the numbers and the dimensions of that thing, you would be like, this thing isn't going to work, but it sounds fantastic and it's super powerful. Like, there's a lot of power in a Charlie Christian pickup. But it also has to do with other factors, the construction of it, what it's made of, all those things. It's really an interesting concept to think about. But this is what we mess with. This is why it's not copying stuff. All these questions that you're asking is exactly why we're not copying pickups. Because I'm literally sitting here as you're saying this. I'm like, okay, well, you have to vary that and you have to change this and you have to compensate for that. But then if you move that, then all this other thing changes. So nothing's the same than when you started. You know what I mean? Like, that's what makes it all fun. To me, that's what makes it fun. But it also makes it why you're not copying stuff. What is your opinion on a neck pickup only guitar? I'm thinking about doing a parts caster with a single neck P90 and a Jazzmaster tremolo. I say you should do that, Junk. I am a huge proponent of every person owning at least one. I currently have 3. Every person owning at least one single pickup guitar. I don't care about the position, but a neck pickup only guitar is really cool. That's what electric guitars were in the beginning. I just want to point that out. Speaking of Charlie Christian and Rickenbacker and all that early stuff, neck pickups, because they just took jazz boxes and chucked pickups in them. So, yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea. Every person, in my opinion, should own at least one single pickup guitar for some time. I'm about to do a video on this because now that I have a Princeton, I'm going to show you why. I think it's really important because it teaches you, if you own a Les Paul Jr. or an Esquire, something like that. I don't even care if it's a Billy Joe Armstrong $500 Junior. It doesn't matter. I don't care. And a single channel, volume and tone, you can have reverb and stuff, like this Princeton, and play just that with no pedals for a while. You will learn more about all this stuff and about how it all works than hanging out on the gear page for a year, because you'll understand the interaction of the pots and the cap. You'll understand the interaction of what a good pickup does. You'll understand how the power staging of your amp works. You'll understand gain stages in general. You'll understand headroom, EQ, how EQ affects headroom. You'll understand all playing dynamics. You'll understand all those things if you have one pickup, a volume and a tone on your guitar, and a volume and a tone on your amp, and nothing else. It will teach you more about that than anything else. And when you start to be able to play like that and get all the sounds that you want, or most of the sounds that you want, I mean, I'm not talking about like, you know, delays and stuff. I'm talking about the actual signal chain of your guitar. Minimize it. You know, you'll learn more about anything than anything. Even if you don't stick with it or stay with it for a long time, because we all want more stuff. I want a neck pickup. Yeah, obviously. You know, I want, you know, an overdrive, and I want more distortion, or I want all these other effects. It's kind of fun. But at the core of it, so just to give you an example, at the core of it, I 99% of the time, I always say this to my friends when I'm not online, that I'm not a guitar nerd. I just play one on TV. And that's kind of true. I mean, I really enjoy all this stuff, but when it really, I really do enjoy it. But when it all comes down to it, I'm playing the Les Paul Jr. into the Princeton with no pedals. Before I had the Princeton, I was playing the Les Paul Jr. into, or I might be playing any of my other guitars, but I only use one pickup. The Silver Sky, I use the neck pickup. The Blue Fiore, that one I have a little more fun with because it's cool, but I use mostly just the neck pickup. Into the St. James, clean channel, edge of breakup, no pedals. I don't even care. I don't even care. Or I'm playing an acoustic guitar on the couch. 99% of the time, the acoustic guitar on the couch is a close travel carbon fiber guitar. Yeah. I mean, I'm very, very simple because I just want to have the fundamentals of it. And then when I come in here and I design stuff, then I'm not like all fogged by it. I want the fundamentals in my head. I think that's one of the reasons why I do it. All right, you guys, we are at an hour. We've got 2 more minutes. If you have any last minute questions or super chats you want to jump in there, you can do that. We're going to cut this thing off at an hour, and then I am going to go get ready to get on the plane to go to Colorado. For those of you that were not here at the beginning, I want to mention again that there is a link in the description to a contest that I'm not doing. This is a D'Angelico and Runway Audio thing, but I'm a part of it. So we're giving pickups away as part of it that you can enter to win. There's going to be 3 winners that are going to win parts of this guitar rig. So it's going to be really cool. So you can do that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is there's also a link in the description to Stringjoy at Sweetwater, because Stringjoy strings are at Sweetwater now. Make sure you go check them out. And these are the new Orbiter coated electric strings that I have not tried yet. These have not even been out of the package yet. I'm excited. They just sent these to me. So we're going to do some testing on these over the next couple of weeks and get a video out to you as soon as possible. Probably going to be 2 videos because I'm going to give you initial thoughts of feeling and stuff, because feel of them is what's really important to me. It's why I don't like elixirs. And they have the Foxwood coated acoustic strings, which I have on most of my acoustic guitars, I think, right now. So I really like them. So you guys are awesome. This has been super fun. And you can get a discount, a 10% discount on Runway audio cables in the description. You can get a discount on Close carbon fiber guitars in the description. And if you use those links, it helps us out. It's the only way we really have sponsors on this channel, so I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. And I'm going to go fly to Denver. So I guess I will see you later this week.